The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Carnegie Hall's smaller rehearsal space, casting long golden shadows across the polished wooden floor. The ornate theater seats curved in perfect semicircles around a gleaming black grand piano, their burgundy velvet cushions worn smooth by decades of music lovers. In this hallowed space where legends had once performed, three people found themselves connected by circumstances none of them had expected. Marcus Johnson stood near the piano bench, his calloused hands resting at his sides. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to rely only on himself. His work shirt and jeans marked him as different from the usual crowd that graced these halls, but his eyes held a depth that spoke of untold stories. He had been cleaning the concert hall for 3 years now, arriving each morning before dawn to prepare these sacred spaces for the artists who would fill them with music. Behind the piano, adjusting his formal black suit jacket, stood Professor William Hartwell. At 58, he had spent most of his adult life within these walls, first as a promising young pianist, then as a teacher who had guided countless students toward their dreams. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his posture impeccable, but there was something in his expression today that seemed different. Softer, perhaps, more uncertain than usual. In the audience section, halfway up the gently sloping rows of seats, sat Elena Rodriguez. 24 years old with an infectious smile that could light up any room, she clutched a worn leather portfolio against her chest. Her simple black dress was carefully chosen for today's audition, though she had spent her last $20 on it. Her dark eyes moved between the two men with a mixture of hope and nervousness that made her seem even younger than her years. The silence in the hall was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of traffic filtering through the heavy walls. This was the kind of quiet that existed in sacred places, where important moments were born and dreams either soared or gently fell to earth. "Miss Rodriguez," Professor Hartwell said finally, his voice carrying easily across the space without effort. "I understand you're here for a rather unconventional audition." Elena nodded, rising from her seat with careful grace. "Yes, Professor. Thank you for agreeing to hear me." Her voice carried a slight tremor, but it was steady enough. "I know this isn't how these things usually work." Marcus shifted slightly, feeling as though he should excuse himself from what was clearly a private moment. He had been polishing the piano when they arrived, and somehow had found himself drawn into their conversation. Now he felt caught between leaving and staying, uncertain of his place in this elegant world that he cleaned but never truly inhabited. "Please, don't go," Elena said, noticing his hesitation. "Actually, this concerns you too, Mr. Johnson." Both men looked at her with surprise. Marcus had introduced himself only briefly when she had asked about the piano's condition, and Professor Hartwell raised an eyebrow at this unexpected turn. Elena opened her portfolio and withdrew a piece of sheet music, its edges worn from handling. 3 months ago, I was working at the coffee shop across the street. It was early morning, and I heard someone humming the most beautiful melody I'd ever encountered. When I looked out the window, I saw you, Mr. Johnson, walking toward the hall's employee entrance. Marcus felt heat rise to his cheeks. He had always hummed while he walked, a habit from childhood that he'd never quite shaken. It helped him think, helped him prepare for the day ahead. "I followed that melody home," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. "I wrote it down, note by note, exactly as I remembered it. Then I began to arrange it, to build around it. It became something beautiful, something I needed to share." She held up the sheet music. "Professor Hartwell, I'm not here just to audition for your program. I'm here because I believe music belongs to all of us, not just those who can afford formal training. And Mr. Johnson, I'm here because your melody deserves to be heard by the world." The professor leaned against the piano, his trained eye scanning the notation on the page Elena offered him. Marcus stood frozen, hardly believing what he was hearing. His simple humming, the unconscious soundtrack to his morning walks, had somehow become something more. "You wrote this arrangement yourself?" Professor Hartwell asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "I taught myself piano on an old keyboard in my apartment," Elena explained. "I work 3 jobs to pay rent, but music has always been my constant companion. When I heard Mr. Johnson's melody, it felt like coming home." Marcus found his voice at last. "I don't understand. It was just something I hummed. My grandmother used to sing something similar when I was little, but I changed it over the years. Made it my own, I guess." "That's exactly what makes it beautiful," Elena said, turning to face him fully. "It's lived music. It's grown and changed and been shaped by experience. That's what real music is supposed to do." Professor Hartwell studied the arrangement more carefully, occasionally humming sections under his breath. The composition was surprisingly sophisticated, showing an intuitive understanding of harmony and structure that impressed him deeply. But more than that, there was something alive in the music, something that spoke of genuine emotion rather than mere technical skill. "Would you play it for us?" he asked Elena. She nodded and walked to the piano, settling herself on the bench with careful movements. Her hands found the keys with the familiarity of long practice, even though this particular piano was far finer than any instrument she had ever touched. The first notes filled the hall with gentle warmth. The melody that Marcus had carried in his heart for years bloomed into full life, supported by Elena's thoughtful arrangement. It began simply, as he had always hummed it, but then grew into something richer and more complex. Harmonies wove around the central theme like conversations between old friends, building to moments of surprising beauty before returning to the humble melody that had started it all. Marcus listened with growing amazement. Here was his grandmother's lullaby transformed into something he never could have imagined, yet it remained recognizably the tune that had comforted him through difficult mornings and long days of work. Professor Hartwell found himself moved in a way he hadn't expected. In his years of teaching, he had heard countless auditions, most of them technically proficient but emotionally distant. This was different. This music spoke of real life, of connection, of the kind of authentic expression that he had almost given up hoping to find in his students. When Elena finished, the silence that followed was different from the one that had preceded the performance. This was the silence of people absorbing something meaningful, allowing beauty to settle into their hearts. "That was extraordinary," Professor Hartwell said quietly. Elena's hands remained on the keys, her eyes closed as the last notes faded from memory. "It felt like coming home," she whispered. Marcus approached the piano slowly, his work boots silent on the polished floor. "I never knew it could sound like that," he said. "I never knew it could be more." "Music is always more when it's shared," Professor Hartwell observed. "Miss Rodriguez, you clearly have exceptional talent, but more importantly, you understand what music is meant to do. It's meant to connect us." He paused, looking between Elena and Marcus with growing conviction. "I have a proposal for both of you." Elena opened her eyes, hope flickering across her features. "Miss Rodriguez, I would like to offer you a full scholarship to our conservatory program," the professor continued. "Your technical skills need refinement, but your musical instincts are remarkable. More than that, you have something that can't be taught, the ability to find beauty in unexpected places and share it with others." Elena's hands flew to her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes. "And Mr. Johnson," Professor Hartwell turned to the janitor, "I would like to invite you to participate in our community outreach program. We've been trying to find ways to connect with people beyond our traditional student body, to remember that music belongs to everyone. Your story, your contribution to this piece, represents exactly what we hope to achieve." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I don't know anything about formal music, Professor. I just clean these halls." "You carry melodies in your heart and share them with the world through your humming," Elena said, rising from the piano bench. "That makes you more of a musician than many people who have formal training." "The community program involves sharing stories about music," Professor Hartwell explained. "Teaching people that they don't need expensive instruments or years of lessons to be part of the musical conversation. Sometimes they just need permission to hum." Over the following weeks, an unlikely partnership began to bloom. Elena threw herself into her studies with the passion of someone who had waited years for such an opportunity. But she also insisted on working with Marcus to develop their piece further, spending hours in the practice rooms after her classes, teaching him basic music theory while he shared more of the melodies he had collected over the years. Marcus discovered that his years of listening to rehearsals and concerts while he worked had given him a deeper understanding of music than he had realized. He began to attend the community workshops that Professor Hartwell organized, initially as a participant but gradually as a co-facilitator, sharing his perspective on how music lived in everyday life. Professor Hartwell found himself energized by their collaboration in ways he hadn't experienced in years. Elena's fresh approach to composition challenged his traditional methods, while Marcus's authentic connection to music reminded him why he had fallen in love with teaching in the first place. The three of them began to meet regularly in the small rehearsal hall where they had first come together. These sessions became part lesson, part collaboration, and part friendship. Elena would play new arrangements of melodies that Marcus brought to their meetings, while Professor Hartwell guided them both toward deeper understanding of musical structure and theory. 6 months later, on a warm spring evening, Carnegie Hall's main concert space was filled with an audience unlike any that typically gathered there. Along with the usual classical music enthusiasts sat janitors and baristas, construction workers and office clerks, people who had been drawn by the community program's promise that music belonged to everyone. On stage, Elena sat at the grand piano, her posture confident now, her simple black dress replaced by an elegant gown that had been a gift from Professor Hartwell's wife. Beside the piano, Marcus stood in a well-fitted suit, no longer the uncertain man who had tried to slip away from that first audition. Professor Hartwell addressed the audience from center stage. Tonight's performance represents something we believe deeply, that music is not the exclusive domain of trained professionals, but rather a language that belongs to all of us. The piece you're about to hear began as a simple melody, hummed by a man walking to work each morning. It was noticed and nurtured by a young woman with extraordinary talent and determination. And it has been shaped into its current form through collaboration and mutual respect. He gestured toward his partners. Elena Rodriguez and Marcus Johnson have taught me that the most beautiful music often comes from the most unexpected places, and that our role as educators is not just to train professionals but to help people discover the music that already lives within them. Elena's hands found the opening notes of their composition, now titled, Morning Walk, in honor of its humble origins. The melody began as it always had, simple and pure, but it had grown over the months of collaboration into something richer and more complex while never losing its essential character. As Elena played, Marcus began to hum along, his voice carrying easily through the hall's perfect acoustics. The sound of his humming wove through the piano accompaniment like a golden thread, reminding everyone present that this music had begun with the most basic of human expressions, the need to make sound, to create beauty, to share something of oneself with the world. The piece built gradually, incorporating themes that Elena had developed and harmonic structures that Professor Hartwell had suggested, but always returning to that original melody that had captured Elena's attention on a busy city morning. It spoke of ordinary people living ordinary lives, but finding moments of transcendence in the simple act of making music together. When the final notes faded, the silence was profound. Then applause began, not the polite appreciation typical of classical audiences, but the enthusiastic response of people who had heard their own lives reflected in music. They had been reminded that they, too, carried melodies in their hearts, waiting to be shared. Later, as the three friends stood together in the empty hall, Elena reflected on how much had changed since that afternoon 6 months earlier. I never imagined that following a melody I heard on the street would lead to this, she said. Music has a way of connecting us in ways we never expect, Professor Hartwell observed. You taught me to listen for the music that exists outside these walls, to remember that our job is not just to create musicians, but to help people discover that they are already musical. Marcus smiled, running his hand along the piano's smooth edge. I still can't believe that my grandmother's lullaby ended up on this stage. It belongs here, Elena said firmly. And so do you, both of you. Music isn't about where you come from or how much training you've had. It's about being willing to listen, to share, and to believe that beauty can come from anywhere. As they prepared to leave the hall that night, Professor Hartwell made one final observation. You know, in all my years of teaching, I've learned that the most important lessons often come not from textbooks or technique, but from moments like these, when people with different backgrounds and experiences come together around their shared love of music. Elena nodded, gathering her sheet music. The melody was always beautiful, but it became extraordinary when we shared it. Marcus looked around the hall one more time, no longer seeing it just as a place he cleaned, but as a space where music lived and breathed and connected people across all the boundaries that typically divided them. I guess I understand now why you call it a universal language. Outside, the city continued its eternal rhythm, full of people humming their own melodies, carrying their own musical stories through the busy streets. And in a small rehearsal hall in Carnegie Hall, three friends had discovered that music's greatest magic was not in its complexity or sophistication, but in its power to bring people together and help them recognize the beauty that already existed within them. The music between them had become something larger than any of them could have created alone, a testament to the idea that the most meaningful art comes not from individual brilliance, but from the willingness to listen, to share, and to believe in the musical possibilities that exist in every human heart. Image prompts. Beginning. A bright, clear HD image showing the elegant interior of a concert hall rehearsal space with ornate burgundy velvet seats arranged in curved rows. Golden afternoon sunlight streams through tall windows, illuminating a gleaming black grand piano. A man in work clothes, Marcus, stands hesitantly near the piano while a distinguished older man in a formal black suit, Professor Hartwell, adjusts his jacket. A young woman, Elena, sits halfway up the audience section, clutching a leather portfolio, wearing a simple black dress. The atmosphere is quiet and expectant. Middle. A bright, clear HD image capturing the moment of musical collaboration. Elena sits at the grand piano, her hands gracefully positioned on the keys, playing with focused concentration. Marcus stands beside the piano, no longer hesitant, listening intently with a look of wonder on his face. Professor Hartwell leans against the piano, studying sheet music with genuine interest and surprise. The hall is filled with the warm glow of late afternoon light, and there's a sense of discovery and connection between the three characters. Ending. A bright, clear HD image of the main concert hall stage during the evening performance. Elena, now in an elegant gown, sits confidently at the grand piano on the well-lit stage. Marcus stands beside her in a well-fitted suit, appearing comfortable and proud. Professor Hartwell addresses a diverse, engaged audience from center stage. The concert hall is filled with people of all backgrounds, janitors, office workers, students, and traditional classical music enthusiasts, all listening with rapt attention. Stage lights create a warm, inclusive atmosphere that celebrates the universal nature of music.